invite the President of the Philippines to take the floor, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We had an extraordinary opportunity today to collectively look back on our shared successes and to exchange views about our prospects for the future. We looked back on ASEAN-EU achievements, most recently the signing of the ASEAN-EU Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement that was signed last October, and the adoption of the Plan of Action to implement the ASEAN-EU's Strategic Partnership for 2023 to 2027. We noted the continued strengthening of cooperation between our regions throughout the pandemic through the following mechanisms: the ASEAN Regional Integration Support from EU+, the EU support to higher education in the ASEAN region, the enhanced regional EU-ASEAN Dialogue Instrument, the EU-ASEAN Cooperation on Sustainable Use of Peatland and Haze Mitigation, Biodiversity Conservation and Management of Protected Areas in ASEAN, the Integrated Program in Enhancing the Capacity of AHA Center and ASEAN Emergency Response Mechanism, and the ASEAN-EU Migration and Border Management Program Phase 2, to name but a few. We appreciate the EU member states, and the EU financial institution, in short, Team Europe, for the combined response of over 800 million euro to fight the health, social, and economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic in ASEAN. As we move forward towards post-pandemic recovery, we eagerly anticipate the resumption of negotiations for the establishment of an ASEAN-EU Free Trade Agreement and of the ASEAN-EU Trade and Investment Work Program. I am pleased that today's summit imbued all of us as ASEAN and EU leaders alike with a sense of renewed commitment to continue nurturing and expanding our unique ASEAN-EU partnership, which will serve us well as we are squeezed by the myriad challenges that we have just discussed, such as the supply chain issues brought about by the pandemic, the global threat to food and energy security made worse by the conflict in Ukraine, and to the societal and economic havoc wrought by climate change, to name a few. I am particularly pleased that this landmark ASEAN-EU commemorative summit was shepherded to conclusion during the Philippines' coordinatorship for ASEAN-EU dialogue relations, and that the adopted ASEAN-EU joint leader statement is reflective of the broad nature of our relations and shows clear commitments from both sides to further enhance our relations. We hope to achieve more milestones as the Philippines continues to guide the ASEAN-EU dialogue relations until 2024. I assure my fellow ASEAN member states and all European Union member states that the Philippines will continue to expend all efforts available to ensure that the implementation of the Plan of Action to implement the ASEAN-EU Strategic Partnership for 2023 to 2027 proceeds as intended. We will strive to expand and deepen our cooperation in the priority areas of post-pandemic economic recovery, strengthening public health institutions, maritime security and cooperation, environmental protection and sustainable economic development, combating, of course, climate change, and connectivity, with its new definition, which goes beyond the strict definition of digital connectivity, but connectivity in all manners, by air, by land, by sea, by digital means. We also will work for the digital transition and the lessening of the so-called digital divide, migration, and gender justice. We look forward to nurturing and bringing forth ASEAN-EU relations to greater heights in our role as country coordinator for ASEAN-EU relations in the next 2 years. Before I end, allow me to thank Your Excellencies, EU Council President Charles Michel, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Czech Prime Minister Peter Fiala, and all EU member state leaders for your very warm welcome that you have given us all here in Brussels. And we look forward to the next commemoration of EU-ASEAN relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll now take a couple of questions. Let me start with someone from the Philippines. We had Alexis Romero from Philippine Star. Yes, please.
Good day, President Marcos. How are you doing?
Just about managing.
Okay, thank you very much. President Marcos, you cited in your speech earlier the need to go beyond declaring respect and support for UNCLOS and to see an effective application of the UNCLOS to address maritime disputes. And we all know that this includes the South China Sea row. What concrete measures can the ASEAN and the EU undertake to ensure the rule of law in disputed areas beyond the usual strongly worded statements?
Well, this is one of the reasons that we have these conferences, is to map out any possible actions that might be jointly taken, because every action that might be taken that objects or brings light to a possible violation of the UNCLOS is much stronger when it is brought about by a group of nations such as ASEAN, and if the EU now, with our strategic partnership, is able to also join their voices to that, then that will be much stronger in the terms of actually being able to enforce what UNCLOS is all about. Their commitment, by the EU's commitment, which is found in the joint declaration, the EU's commitment to even the doctrine of the DOC, the doctrine of behaviors in the South China Sea, is already a very, very big step for us in the Philippines, for example, and for all the countries around the South China Sea. That we now have the support, a strategic support from not only the member countries of EU, but of EU itself. Now, because EU and ASEAN together comprise the largest, most well-organized regional agrupations, then that will be a very, very strong position to be able to negotiate, even individually for the Philippines or jointly with ASEAN or even with the EU as perhaps as a third party for us to take action and to negotiate further these difficulties that we are all having to face with the problems in terms of territoriality in the South China Sea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question. Rosie Birchard, yes, from Channel News Asia, please.
Thank you very much. Rosie Birchard reporting for Channel News Asia, CNA. To President Marcos and Prime Minister Hun Sen, the EU has announced this 10 billion euros of infrastructure investments. Now that is just a drop in the ocean really when you compare it to what the Asian Development Bank estimates is needed in terms of investment to keep up levels of growth in ASEAN. What would you have liked to see? Would you like to see more? Can you give us some insights into that? And to Presidents Michel and von der Leyen, we heard a lot about a potential block-to-block free trade agreement there. Now, I believe that's still pretty far off. What are the biggest barriers in your eyes? Is it Myanmar? Is it about climate policies from the ASEAN side? What do you think needs to happen to be able to get there? Thank you very much.
Go ahead. Well, I think the one who can best answer that will be the donor of the 10 billion euro, and we would like to ask them how they would want us to use their hard-earned money when it comes to ASEAN. So perhaps President Michel.
No, maybe I will try to answer both questions. First of all, we are absolutely determined to upgrade the level of our ambition in terms of a strategic partnership with the ASEAN countries. This is very clear. And this is also very important to take into account the fact that the EU is mobilizing money in order to make very tangible the bilateral partnerships we have with each of the ASEAN, the members of this ASEAN organization, each of the ASEAN countries. And this is an important signal that we want to send to the leaders, but also to the people in that region. Point one. Maybe with a smile, another information that I had the occasion to share yesterday with some of the ASEAN colleagues. Sometimes it could happen, we have some difficulties within the EU to be on the same page. Sometimes we have divisions, we have difficult questions, we have difficult topics. But one thing is absolutely certain. When we have on the agenda of the European Council our relationship with ASEAN, spontaneously, immediately, the 27 member states, we are all on the same page. We are absolutely motivated to strengthen the ties. We have exactly the same assessment. We think this is a strategic importance for all of us to develop and to make more tangible this partnership with that region. And this is a transition to the second part of your question, the trade agreements. You know, this is a general debate across the EU. We believe in the free trade. We believe in the globalization, but we think at the same time that we need to work for more common standards, more similar standards, in order to take more into account our common goals in terms of climate change, for instance, in terms of labor conditions, for instance. And it's very good that we have demonstrated that it's possible with some of the countries of ASEAN to have free trade agreements, and we can observe that this is very positive on both sides. It's delivering concrete and tangible results in terms of increase of the volume of the economic exchanges between those countries and the EU. And this was told by the President of the Commission. It's not a secret that we have also exploratory tours with some other ASEAN countries in order to identify how we can try to make some progress and maybe to launch negotiations in the following months or in the near future. And there is another dream we have. We have the dream to make possible, sooner or later, EU-ASEAN free trade agreement. But of course, in order to make it happen, it's also important that within the ASEAN, steps are made in terms of economic integration. It's not exactly the same situation in each of those countries, and it's probably also an encouragement with respect for the ASEAN countries to observe some progress in terms of economic integration. You can see that we are really motivated. We are very proud because this statement today is a very strong message. This is a strong impetus for the future. There are concrete projects on the table, and we are very optimistic and confident that on a regular basis we'll have the occasion to meet at the leaders level in order to assess what we did and what we need to do in order to make sure that we are implementing what we have decided.
If I might just add something, it is remarkable actually to see during our meetings how, despite the marked differences between EU member states and ASEAN member states, that it is remarkable that we identify the same priorities as EU together as ASEAN does, as the EU seems to also have the same priorities. And those are in the areas that we spoke about: environmental protection, sustainable economic development, combating climate change, connectivity, cybersecurity, digital transition, migration, gender justice. So it is, as I said, it is just an indication and a manifestation of how global we have actually become. And although we come from very different places, from very different conditions, we have a very similar view, very similar worldview of the challenges that we all face.
Perhaps you want to say first? Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to add, please put on the earphone. I would like to add the response from Charles Michel and Excellency Marcos. Our point is that ASEAN not just to wait, not always waiting for the help from EU, but we need to see the complementarily the economy of the two regions. It's true that European countries are more advanced, but Europe and ASEAN is not just a place to receive only assistance from Europe. In this situation, that ASEAN and Europe agree together to have the free trade agreement together. We don't want our people to remain poor and then remain preferential treatment from EU. We would like to want free trade agreement between the two blocs. What you mentioned, whether there is any obstacle with the problem of Myanmar, we should not put politics to hinder the free trade agreement. At the opening speech, the speech of President of Indonesia mentioned already, the partnership needs to be equal. Cannot use the law from one side to apply on the other. We need that the two parties need to be equal to implement the quickest possible, not just to base on the situation of Myanmar and any other country and then allow it to disturb our efforts with the establishment of the free trade agreement between the two blocs. In reality, for human rights, in relation to this and that issue, I would like also to add whether EU sign agreement with how many countries in ASEAN and about human rights over there. Not everything are the same, but we have common point. Target the goal to be connected between the two regions, the economy that is complement to each other. That the point that remind ASEAN to try to stand up to be partner with equal with EU. Thank you.
Madam President.
Yeah, indeed, you are right. Global Gateway is a much bigger program, 300 billion for investment worldwide. And there are different regions with different needs. The advantage with ASEAN is that we're meeting a highly developed economy. And therefore, the investment is not only the crucial point, but as this is public investment. For us, it's important to have these infrastructure projects. And by infrastructure, I'm not only speaking about old-fashioned infrastructure terminology, but in the sense that President Marcos was describing. And what we need there is the incentive of the public sector as joint actions where it is needed, a conducive environment, for example, regulatory environment, the private sector, and the exchange of technology. And this is growing on 3 partnerships that we are developing together: the ASEAN-EU Green Transition Partnership, the ASEAN-EU Connectivity Partnership that starts this year, and the ASEAN-EU Energy Dialogue. And this is the overall concept. So you're right, the 10 billion are one part, but certainly not the whole picture of the way we address the projects. Now, what the region-to-region free trade agreement is concerned, we started to negotiate in 2007, and a few years after, it stopped. And then, for a while, nothing happened. And then, with the one or the other member country of ASEAN, we were able to develop a free trade agreement. Therefore, we have now building blocks. I would call it that name. It's much more mature. And this encourages, and I'm very pleased to listen to our guests, This encourages us to think in a broader spectrum for a region-to-region free trade agreement, as we have already experienced now with building blocks. It may be that, first of all, the one or the other free trade agreement with individual countries of the ASEAN is coming first, but we have no experience. The free trade agreements that are in place are delivering, so they show the success, and we have proven that we're able to match the different interests.
Thank you. Yes, Finbar, please.
Thank you very much. Finbar Birmingham with the Hong Kong newspaper, the South China Morning Post. A lot of talk about the things that you have in common, but just reading the joint statement, there certainly are some differences, particularly on Ukraine, where it says most members strongly condemned the war in Ukraine and stressed it is causing immense human suffering. To Prime Minister Hun Sen, President Marcos, could you explain why it isn't all members that are condemning the war in Ukraine? Just a follow-up question. ASEAN is often portrayed as a swing state between the big powers of the United States, China and Europe. I'm wondering from both of your perspectives whether you welcome the European Union to compete with the United States and China, or whether indeed you do see it in that way. Thank you very much.
I should underline a bit on this point. It's true that in ASEAN, all countries do not have the same position. The decision at the UN, some countries vote support, some vote abstention. For Cambodia, we vote support the UN Security Council resolution condemning the invasion, the annexation of land. And as ASEAN chair, we also coordinate to issue the statement on the dialogue or ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. We do not agree with the aggression, the use of force, or the annexation of land. This position, we are not only the one who support, but we co-sponsor that UN Security Council resolution at the UN. And in relation to position, and with Ukraine issue, Cambodia also make decision already in order to send the deminer trainer with Japan, working with Japan, to help the Ukraine deminer, provide them training. And we also accept 15 Ukraine in January to come and then be trained in destroying mine and in the humanitarian season. And we send our force not to fight against Russia and Ukraine. Please, Excellency, Michael, tell the Philippine position. Thank you.
Perhaps I should answer the second part of your question about the competition between the United States and China, and if it's that what we want. Believe me, we would rather not have these tensions in our part of the world. That is the last thing that we would like. And the Philippines, for our part, has taken an independent policy, and we absolutely refuse to go back to the situation of the Cold War, where we have to pick sides in terms of who the superpower is that we are aligned with. What we say is that, to put it very simply, is that in the Philippines, our foreign policy is the policy for peace and for the national interest. So foreign policy will always be guided by a commitment to peace and the pursuit of the national interest. In terms in terms of that competition, as I said, we have to find, I think all of us, member states, especially in ASEAN, have to find our own way. However, I think I would not be overstepping by saying that we agree in the sense that we are committed to the idea that the future of the Asia-Pacific region should be decided by Asia-Pacific countries and not any other power outside of our area.
Thank you. We have one more question, I believe. Yes, from Nestor Corrales, please. Also from the Philippine Daily Inquirer. Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. President Marcos. What has been the EU's response to your call to concretize the loss and damage concept in relation to climate financing, and what measures can be done to ensure that major polluters will be made accountable?
Well, it's this very tricky question, and I brought it up simply to illustrate that EU has in fact been at the forefront in the kind of shall we say compensation for climate change. And however, the issue of damage and loss is still, although it is a big step forward that we all now accept, both developing and developed countries now accept the concept of damage and loss, the actual number is very, very hard to determine. And beyond that, even if we are able to quantify the damage and loss, you say it's $100 million, whatever the number is, what do we do with that number? Who do we go to? Who do we, who pays the bulk of it? However, I sense that there is a willingness for the developed countries to participate and to help in mitigation, to help in adaptation for those countries like the Philippines, most of the countries around ASEAN that are very vulnerable. There is a willingness to help, but how to provide that help is still a question that we cannot definitively answer. That is why a lot of work has to be done, and I have brought it up with the EU, and I've said that this is an important issue, especially for the Philippines and for many, many other countries. But again, it's the work that we have ahead of us to be able to come to some kind of agreement as to what damage and loss actually means, and how will the compensation for that damage and loss be made. And for my part, I think until we are able to determine that, I think we should think of what we can do in the future. And that, I think, has great potential to be put into effect in the short term rather than in the very long term. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this press conference. Check out the joint declaration which we have published. Thank you and see you tomorrow.